Hello, and welcome to a nice little wrap up. The month of September. The month of September continues the trend of this entire year so far, which is a mixed month. I completed a trilogy, continued a trilogy, read some poetry. Unfortunately, had a real stinker. No complete 5 stars, but a couple of 4.5s. So we have to take what we're getting at the moment. I read 9 months in the month of. I read 9 months. I read 9 books in the month of September. A lot of things were planned, a couple of little things just thrown in there for the hell of it. One, heavy pressure from Grace, so we'll get into everything. Let me know how your reading month was. I continue to be plagued by a mid-year. And when I asked everyone in the Discord about it, everyone was like, oh, I'm having a sick year, my year's going great. And I was like, oh, good, great, guys. That makes me feel better. But evidently I am taking the L so everyone else can win. The first book I read in the month of September was The Sirens of Titan by Kurt Vonnegut, continuing my Kurt Vonnegut read along thing, where, much like I did with Virginia Woolf, I'm reading all of Kurt Vonnegut's books, at least fiction-wise, that's my plan. And I'll do this now whenever I borrow a book from the library. Shout out to local libraries, go to your library, very good resource. It's a great way of getting access to a lot of books that don't necessarily get reprints as well, that kind of thing. And also, I truly believe for things like classics and that kind of thing, if you're not finding them in secondhand stores or anything like that, libraries are a fantastic place to do it, because don't waste your money on classics that aren't going anywhere. You're spending a full price amount to an author that is dead. So Sirens of Titan was a fun little number. That's the best way I can describe it. A very bizarre book. And I can express to you how bizarre it was by trying to explain what the fuck it was about. Essentially, there's this guy called Rumford. He entered some kind of wormhole that means, with his dog, which means that every certain amount of days, he appears on Earth in a specific spot. He just appears with his dog, talks with people, that kind of thing, expresses... The idea is that when he entered this wormhole, he now has access to everything that will or has ever happened to a certain point. He is kind of telling people what to expect, what to do, etc. And it's a classic Kurt Vonnegut expression of the futile nature of trying to fight against free will. The idea of whether free will exists or not, whether it matters, whether like I said, whether it's all futile as a result, if free will either does or does not exist, whether the choices we make matter or whether the lack thereof makes them matter, all kinds of ideas that I find fascinating, and Vonnegut approaches them with an irreverency that I can't help but kind of admire. The Sirens of Titan is, in my opinion, better but more weird than his first book, Player Piano, but is nowhere near the quality of Mother Night, which is just a different level, as I discussed last month. Mother Night is a book I will recommend forever. Sirens of Titan I gave a 3.75. The kind of irreverency that I enjoyed, and the idea of trying to beat free will, beat fate, etc., that I thought was funny, was there's a particular scene. One of our main characters, in the beginning, he's told to visit when this man's going to appear, and so he turns up, and the guy is kind of like, "You're gonna have a child on the moon Titan after going to Mars." And you will have that child with my wife, and all this kind of stuff. And the guy leaves. There's a crowd confronting him to be like, what did he tell you, type thing, what's going on, what's the future, etc. And he kind of like takes it all very brazenly. It doesn't bother him. He just walks through it, gets in a car and deals with it, type thing. And the driver who's taking him away is kind of like, whoa, how did you how did you cope with that so well? I was terrified. And he comes to the realization where he's like, well, if this man knows everything, then he knows I have to leave Earth to go to Mars or go to Titan inevitably. so I can never die on Earth. So I'm invincible, I'm invulnerable while I'm here. There's no way I can die, so I'm limitless. And then all of a sudden he goes, but then I can never go to Titan because I'm going to die on Titan. I can't leave to go to Titan because I can never go to Titan. And so then he becomes actively like conspiring to make sure that none of the things that so he like sends letters to the wife being a piece of shit type thing, and then so she won't be interested in him at all because he's scared of having a child with her, and all of this. And so the opening of the book is very strong, and I thought it was very funny. And then the middle of the book lost me for a little bit because it becomes very abstract and bizarre, and it deals with kind of the loss of self. So you become uncentered from your main character until you come back to centering. It's hard to explain that position because you are still following the same character throughout, but it all comes together very well. I was thinking I would give it like a 3.5 for most of the book, and then that the ending kind of tied some things together thematically. I was like, this is not like a great book for me, but this is a strong, good book. So 3.75 is where it's settled. The next book I will not really talk about because I have a whole review on it, but I did read Katabasis by RF Kuang, and I gave it a 2-star. Very, very sad. I did not enjoy the book, unfortunately. Yeah, not much more to say than that I didn't spend 30 minutes ranting about in my review. I was also reading Mockingbird by Walter Tevis. Yeah, I would say Trevis, but it's Tevis. I read this because someone in the comment section had recommended it to me, and then it came up as Jimmy Nuts's Patreon pick, and I was in the chat, and I was like, "Well, someone just recommended this to me," and Jimmy was like, "We should read it together." Now I'm expecting it to read together, and I was like, yeah, I've trapped myself here. And then I did read it, and I did enjoy it. It's a dystopian novel. Robots have essentially replaced humankind majoritively. People are no longer having children, romantically interested, that kind of thing. And the whole book is a classic dystopian novel through our main character trying to express and find meaning in life again and what life is. The strongest thing about this book is that it does it by virtue of an admiration and a love for reading, which is something that, if you're reading the book, is more than likely something you will connect to. There are beautiful passages in this book about the idea of reading and the education that you get as a result of that. This also idea of there's another main character that is this kind of advanced robot that is humanoid and that kind of thing, and the robot is essentially searching for the meaning and wants to have a life that can be seen as human. And the best thing I can say about this book, I gave it a 3.5. I thought it was a very good book. Is that it created a lot of conversation, and it's an interesting book of the time because the way it chooses to the allegories that it chooses to put in place to draw allusions to the real world are very coded in the 80s when it was written, that tread a line between dated but also you can understand what it's doing with it. And it was interesting because me and Jimmy seemed to come down on a similar side of it, but then I had a message with Rid, and it was fascinating what they kind of brought to it, and I was kind of like, damn, this is an incredibly nuanced reading of the book that I really enjoyed reading and hearing about that perspective. After that, I continued what I believe is one of the most underrated trilogies going at the moment, and that is On Vicious Worlds by Bethany Jacobs, which is the second book in the Kingdom trilogy. The third book comes out in November or December, I forget which. But I emailed the publisher. They were like, yeah, we'll send you a copy. And then Canada Post went on strike. So I don't know whether they ever did send me a copy or whether Canada Post just haven't it's stuck there, and I'll never know, which scares me, because I'm like, well, I don't want to buy a copy when it comes out, because what if the strike ends and then there's a book coming for me, but I want to read the book. Nevertheless, that does not mean anything to my review of this book. This is becoming a Discord darling, thanks to the recommendation of Anya and Kolu, and they did fantastic work, because On Vicious Worlds continues this fantastic trilogy, which is based on the experiences of migrant cultures throughout history, putting it into this kind of massive sci-fi world, which I don't want to spoil anything in terms of what happened in the first book, but we have relationships develop and change. Overall, I just think that this is one of the most entertainingly written books, like a series that I've read. It's one where I feel I feel nothing but just solid enjoyment every time I pick up the book. I know it's going to be fun. I know it's going to have stakes. I know it's going to have interesting politics and interesting societal movements and kind of politicking, and it's going to deal with people doing some barbaric stuff and people doing some resistance and all the classics that you want. And I thoroughly enjoyed my experience. This was a 4-star purely because I think the pacing got a little mixed around in certain places. Certain things were also a little predictable, in my opinion, just in certain elements. Some bits were a surprise. It's kind of self-aware in the fact that part of the plot is directly repeating itself from the first book again, and that there are parallels to draw from that. However, it is a little kind of, I find myself kind of like, this is a very familiar plot. I'm literally reading it again, just with different characters dotted in. But like I said, I still think this is highly underrated. I would 100% recommend it, picking up these Burning Stars for a fun old time with, it's essentially a big fantasy story about migrants and about oppression put in a sci-fi world with queer normative society that's about terrible people and sometimes people trying their best with the awful people. Then I read T.S. Eliot's collected poems. This was one that he actually put together himself before he died. So he was basically like doing his best of. And I have read T.S. Eliot before, and I didn't realise how much I had read basically almost all of his famous works. Because I'd read The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, I'd read The Wasteland, I had read 4 quartets. The only thing that I read that is kind of big that I hadn't read before was The Hollow Men, which was also fantastic. T.S. Eliot is one of my favourite poets. I think he just has a cadence to his writing that I find just so evocative, and it pulls you in and you feel enwrapped in this depraved kind of it just feels like you're walking down a grimy UK street. There's no other way to describe it. Like you're in the middle of London and it's a shithole and there's fog everywhere and you're like, God, this is progress. Like that's kind of how it makes you feel sometimes. Towards the end, where he did convert to Christianity, there are some poems where I was like, I literally don't give a shit. I'm sorry. I'm sure if you're a Christian, you'll enjoy it. But personally, I was like, I don't care. I just didn't care. So bear that in mind. But I love... The Wasteland is a masterpiece. The Hollow Men was also fantastic. The question for you in the comments section. So the quote, this is how the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper, is from The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot. Which, funnily enough, The Wasteland is referenced in Katabasis, and The Hollow Men is referenced in Mockingbird, which I thought was just an incredible happenstance inside of a month. I was not meaning either, and then suddenly I was like, whoa, The Wasteland, and whoa, fucking the Hollow Men. So I was taken by surprise there. But yeah, This Is How the World Ends, Not With a Bang But a Whimper, is from the Hollow Men. And it's one of those things where I was talking to Grace, and I put it in chat as well, and I was like, that was released in 1925. Is there a more well-known quote that is constantly referenced in film, television, etc., that people don't remember where it's from, that is more famous than that quote? This is how the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. I'd be very interested in the answers, because I was just thinking about it, because I had no idea it was from a T.S. Eliot poem. Afterwards, I read with Grace The Inheritance. This was a great collection. I gave this a 4.5, as well as the T.S. Eliot collection as well. They were both my favourite reads of the month. And it wasn't for the reason I was expecting. I read this thinking, can't wait to read the Hobb short stories. And the Hobb short stories were really good. Really enjoyed them. But what took me by surprise was how fascinating. I loved the Megan Lindholm short stories in this. I was fascinated by the ideas she was throwing out. And it created a much more nuanced and full image of the author as a whole, combining these two personas. Because a lot of the short stories are from when Lindholm was still, was not a professional writer. And so it's talking about her working at Sears, and it's talking about her working menial jobs and that kind of thing. And the reality that she's creating is much more working class, which is obviously something I always connect to and love. And it was an interesting dynamic where it's a lot more focused on sometimes drug abuse, sometimes familial abuse, all of these different things. And every single short story, I was just provoked by these ideas. And some of it's to do with finding meaning in creating art, and finding meaning while you're working a menial job, and you want to get out, and how you can free your mind, and all these things that I appreciated so much. So yeah, The Inheritance was fantastic, but just not for the reasons I was expecting at all. Afterwards, I made a little bit of a cheat, because the Patreon pick for the trilogy that I was reading was by Amy, and that has been The Winnowing Flame, which starts with the Ninth Reign. I read that in August. And I decided to just finish the trilogy. I read both in the month of September. I changed Ninth Reign. When I read the whole trilogy, I was thinking back, and I was like, okay, I may have been overhyping myself a little with Ninth Reign. I think all three books are 3.5 stars across the board. I think it's an incredibly level trilogy. I don't think some things get better, some things get worse, but it's a consistent level that I found very readable, very enjoyable. And I'm going to make a whole video reviewing the trilogy. But my main takeaway is that this is a book that deserved the treatment of, not necessarily to the degree of Wheel of Time, but this is a trilogy. This is a trilogy that on paper I can see how you think it could work in a trilogy, but when you get into it, I'm like, this is probably at least a 4, probably a 5 book series jammed inside of a trilogy. It is a series of potential. It is a series that I every time I was reading it, I was like, man, if we got more of this, and we got more of this, and this happened in a lengthier process, and we had more time with this set of characters, we had more time exploring this culture, and there's so much going on. This is one of the most, from an ideas perspective, one of the most creative fantasy worlds I've read in a long time, that is bringing in eldritch horror with classic fantasy, bringing in European mythology, a lot of UK mythology and perspective, and bringing in I could see there's inspiration from Hobb, and I can see inspiration from Tolkien, and I can see so much. Wheel of Time as well. Like I said, I think there's things from all of these different things, and I'm just like, if we had time, if we had fucking 7-8 books to explore everything that this author is trying to tell, then I think it would be a fantasy great. And unfortunately, it's 3 books. And as a result, I was kind of like, some things in book 2 I felt like had the stakes of a book 3, and stuff that should have been in book 2 happened in book 3, which then made it feel oddly paced, and it affected my reading of book 2, that I was waiting for certain things to happen that never happened until book 3. Book 3 it has very little falling action. It has almost none. It has like maybe 2 pages, which like the book sets you up to think that you're going to have much more falling action, and so I found myself just constantly tussled between the books that I was reading and the potential that I felt reading it. But like I said, I still enjoyed the book. I still think all of them 3.5 stars. They're very enjoyable. And specifically, I'm not going to name the character, but there's kind of 3 protagonists throughout the series. And one of them, the conclusion made me tear up at the end of the 3rd book. And they are one of my favourite protagonists now in fantasy. Like, I just loved who they were and what they did, and their whole character, how they morphed over the 3 books. They were the one that got the most attention, and from a character growth perspective. And yeah, I think that they are without a doubt the best character and the strongest part of the series, and really got me through everything because they were awesome. And there were certain things going on with their character where I was like, like I said, if they had the time, there are certain, especially in the end of the 3rd book, with certain conversations happening, I'm like, if we had more time building up the politics of this, the emotions of this, the characters of this, it would be a fucking absolute stonewall fantasy classic moment. And instead, it's kind of like a good moment in the series, like a great moment, but not anything, like, not a grandstand like it could have been. Incredible ideas. I think from just a creative point of view, it's a series worth reading. Because like I said, there are some things that just... The other problem is that we've got like this eldritch horror element. Like, there's some of the designs of these monsters. Like, there's a lot of insect-based, like, spiders and beetles and all of this that just kind of gives you the heebie-jeebies. But then our characters are kind of aloof and almost MCU-ish sometimes in their quips that I never like. It's the reason I stopped reading the Wesley Chu books. It's the reason this didn't work for me to the top degree it could have, because I do dislike when I feel like my characters aren't taking the stakes as seriously as I am. And I just don't think that should be the case. Unless you're having, like, that's the point, which I don't think this was. And the final book I read, because it finally became available at my local bookshop, is Heartlamp by Banu Mushtaq, which won the Booker International Prize this year. And I've been wanting to read. It was one of the only books from the list this year that I was really interested in. And also, none of them were available in Canada when I was looking. Like, you could order them, but it was like 4 to 6 weeks at points, and they weren't available in any stores. And finally, Heartlamp came in, and I bought it and I read it in the same month. I just bought it immediately and started. And this is a series of short stories from, I don't know what the pronunciation is, Canada, I don't know, but it's Kannada. I apologise, I should have looked before this. She's a Muslim writer in southern India, I believe. Yeah, southern India, and she writes about the experiences of women and girls inside of this culture. There are some short stories in here that will stick with me for a long time. One in particular, I think, is one of the best short stories I've ever read, and I must have told probably 4 or 5 people. I just described this short story to them at work, with random people, with Grace. I was just telling my parents I was talking to about it, because it was just an incredible short story. It was called Black Cobras. And it was actually, I think, the second short story in the collection. No, third. And that's the one I recommend. If you can find Black Cobras or support, obviously, having translated fiction, and this is like a first winner from this culture as well and this language, in terms of like having it translated and everything, which is also very important to support, in my opinion. The thing that I loved about this collection in particular is that it's obviously written in southern India, which is a primarily Hindu country, India, following a woman who is a Muslim and is existing inside of being a minority as a Muslim in India, and also as a woman inside of a kind of patriarchal society. But the thing that's so powerful about having fiction translated from somewhere like this is that it is someone critiquing the culture from inside of it. You do not have this sense of judgment from outside, the idea of a Western author judging a different culture. You don't have the veiled Islamophobia that can exist in certain stories critiquing Islam or the like Indian culture or something. It's not coming from a place of offense or attack. It's coming from within a community and challenging the status quo, and the it's the same way. The way I feel about it is the same way that I can live inside the culture I live in and chat mad shit about it, is the same way that Banu Mushtaq is describing inside this book. You know, I actively hate a lot of English culture, but I am also English and can comment on that, and it comes from a place of love and frustration, and that's what I think is so important about having voices like this and actually having them reach a worldwide stage, because so much of the commentary and the news discourse comes from coerced stories from people who aren't even from there or don't even care about there. It's just people creating stories to essentially antagonize or scapegoat, whereas Banu Mushtaq is someone who is just chatting mad shit about the society in which she lives, and it's fantastic. Specifically, the Black Cobras ends with one of the best endings to a short story I've ever read. They're the books that I read in September. A new thing I'm going to add in is quickly a reference to the TBR for October, which we're currently in. As of recording this, it's the 1st. And inside of that, in the Discord, following our Lord of the Rings reread, I am reading the Silmarillion for the first time. I'm currently 37 pages in, and it is a doozy. But yeah, I have begun the Silmarillion. I began Cat's Cradle early. I started it with a few days left in September, so I actually just finished this today, but it will be in the October wrap-up, continuing my Kurt Vonnegut read. I will be reading I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, which will be... I'm starting a new series, so let me know what you think about this, if you make it this far in the video. I'm going to be talking in depth about this with Joanna, where I'm essentially going to be contacting booktubers, and they choose a book that has meant a lot to them or they want to deep dive into and have a long conversation on. And it's just essentially going to be, I want it to be an in-depth conversation about the book, and specifically what drew this person to it, why they became engrossed with it, what they take from it, where it came in the point of life, why it meant so much to them. The Patreon pick was from Ben, and that is A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson, which I'm looking forward to. If you want to get involved, choose one of the Patreon picks, then the link will be in the description if you are in a position to do so. And yes, I've been wanting to read this since it came out, so this is finally the push to read this book. And finally, I have not mentioned it in any wrap-up, any video at all, but in the last couple of months, I have been reading The Divine Comedy by Dante, and I finished Purgatorio in September, And later into October, probably going into November, I'm going to read Paradiso to finish the Divine Comedy. So it's a big fucker. Lot going on. I'm really enjoying it. And yeah, but I thought I'd wait and just do the whole thing at once. Because why not? So, like I said, if you did enjoy, please do like, please do subscribe. Discord, Patreon, Instagram, whatever, links in the description. And as always, have a nice rest of your day.